we have a couple of questions that are really about the financial picture moving forward. Let me bundle those. Larry, if you're okay with taking them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the first from Bruno Van Dyke, given the uncertainty of the global economy and the ambiguity about whether vaccines will bring the pandemic under control, what's the financial outlook for Hewlett, for the foundation sector in general, if you feel inclined to respond to that? And David from the Lawfare Institute adds also, how can we think about macroeconomic trends, other medium to long-term dynamics that affect the foundation's position in 5, 10, even 20 years?
So yeah, let me just say a couple words about that, both in the short run and the long run. So in terms of the economic outlook, in the short run, of course, the economy actually held up surprisingly well during the first year of the pandemic. There is a chance, if the vaccines get rolled out and work relatively quickly, that will continue, but there is also a chance, particularly in the US, as Congress fails to provide any sort of relief effort, that we could have the economic collapse that we thought might happen last year happen this year. For Hewlett, we have, and I've written about this for us, we've structured the way in which we do our finances and our grant making to think both about our capacity to support our present grantees and the needs of future grantees, because we are in all of the areas in which we will work a long-term funder working on long-term problems. And so we know we're going to need to continue doing that work over time. The way we have managed that over the last few years was coming out of the 2009 downturn as we recovered to create a fairly substantial pool of unallocated funds that we can allocate each year as long as times are good, but that we can use to absorb losses when the economy collapses, so that we can, as we will, continue to support our current grantees without having to cut our grant making to them, at least unless there's a truly massive collapse in the economy. And even then, the first 25% of loss or so can be absorbed that way without having to cut anything in terms of what we give our grantees, while still preserving our capacity to provide equivalent support in the future. And we will stick with that plan. We think it's a really good plan that balances the needs of present grantees and future grantees reasonably well. The foundation sector is, and so when we think about the long macro trends, that's what this plan is structured around. Wherever they go, we have, we think, done a reasonably responsible job of being able to preserve our ongoing support, but also preserve our capacity, whatever those future trends are. In terms of the foundation sector as a whole, it's much harder to say. Most funders have not really planned that way, one way or the other. So when a downturn happens, they have the choice of either continuing to spend at the same level and having less for the future, or cutting their spending in the present. And as you might have followed, there's a lot of ferment about that in the foundation world now. Most of the stuff you read is about increasing spending, but if you look at what most foundations are doing, I think they are likely to cut if there is an economic collapse. And so one would have to think about what that means. I think a bigger concern for many, many of the grantees is not so much what will happen in the foundation world as what will happen in the government world, because a really big portion of the funding across sectors comes from government. And when there's an economic collapse and government taxes collapse, you see cuts in funding, and that's I think likely to be a bigger challenge. And as I say, I think the best we can do, other than preserving our support for our grantees, comes back to an earlier point, which is encouraging more and more of the funders to provide general operating support, so that the grantees have the capacity to build resilience for these kinds of things. And hopefully that will be something that sticks as we come out of the pandemic, and that will give you all the opportunity to build reserves, to build contingency plans, and so on for the economic disruptions that may happen.